So today we're going to talk about everybody's favorite subject, report writing. I do my best to try to make this as painless as possible. There are certain things that have to be covered, certain things that can be considered boring or, not very exciting. I always encourage people to speak up if something, you have something interesting to say or a question to ask or anything like that, it helps break up. So for example, in the forensic science class today, I got off on a tangent about use of force stuff because somebody brought up some incident in Arkansas, I guess, where they were like beating this guy's head on the pavement and stuff. So I'm not opposed to getting distracted on those kinds of things because I can always kind of steer it back where I need to, and I have a fair amount of leeway in how I cover things. So the more though that we do that kind of thing, the less likely I am to lose you, to look out and see the eyes that are open but not seeing, because you're thinking about something else because this is so boring. So anyway, that being said, I also don't do death by PowerPoint. I generally have this on here for two reasons. One is once in a while people miss class and they have to stream it or something, and it kind of gives them something to look at other than my face. And sometimes it also helps me to, kind of prompt me on what I'm trying to cover. This is the one that I actually made for the defensive tactics class. So I actually stick a little closer to it than I do most of the classes. Of the PowerPoints that are there are the ones that came with the book, and I skip over half the slides, because it's like, I either talk about it for 10 seconds or I don't talk about it at all, or I do it in a different way. So anyway, I've had to adapt to my teaching, COVID and all that stuff. So I used to like to pace around the room. That's my favorite thing when I'm, teaching, but when I do that, the microphone doesn't pick up my voice very well. So I'm kind of tethered to the computer until they give me enough of a raise that I can afford one of those microphones, wireless. So I don't hold my breath for that. So especially if the enrollment numbers are down, they're definitely not giving me raises. So report writing is about documenting something, so we're documenting blank and fill in the blank, and the blank could be we're documenting an encounter that we have with somebody, a call for service that we have for somebody, or just something that seems like something that we might have to defend ourselves, and what we did. So for example, if somebody calls, and I don't know, you went to a call for service, you didn't really do anything, you didn't arrest anybody, therefore you didn't really write a report, you just told dispatch that you handled it and you went on, and then somebody files a complaint, your supervisor is probably going to say, hey, you need to write a report about that, right? This non-issue thing, because they said you were rude to them or something like that. And then sometimes it's you're an investigator, like that's what this class is about. You're primarily not going to be writing the original narratives on reports. You're going to be writing supplemental narratives because basically a cop is going to come and do some initial report, and then it's going to be flagged as something that's complex enough that they can't investigate it themselves, and it's going to get bumped up to detectives, and the detectives are going to do all of this follow-up stuff. So your reports as detectives are almost always supplementals, and they're very frequently kind of short things that normal people would not expect that you would have to actually write a report for this. So for example, I have written reports that said, on this date and this time, I attempted to contact so-and-so and I was unsuccessful, I left a message. That's my report, right? Because especially when you're dealing with an investigation that's complex, people need to be able to, like your bosses and other officers need to be able to know if something was done or not. and that's the best way to do it, is to just document that. The other thing is sometimes it can save you on complaints and things like that. So if you finally do get a hold of so-and-so, whoever they are, suspect, victim, whatever, if they come in and complain saying, hey, you know, I'm the victim in this case or whatever, and nobody has followed up with me, you know, to get whatever information or to about the status of the case, and I can show, or you know, the sheriff or whoever it is that's in charge of complaints looks in the file and then shows 2 or 3 reports saying that they attempted contact and were unsuccessful. They went by the house and they couldn't get anybody. They left a business card on the door and nobody got back with them. At least then it kind of, you know, does get something. We get involved in a lot of stuff that ends up in court. I mean, that is it. Whether you're a cop, whether you're a corrections officer, whether you're a juvenile officer, trying to think of other things, but pretty much anything within criminal justice that isn't like clerical work, you know, anything that involves field work, interacting with people, there's a likelihood that there's going to be, that's going to end up in court some way, somehow. It could be like the most common thing is like you're a cop and you arrest somebody and there's a case and then it goes to court because they're trying to prove that they didn't do something that you think you can prove that they did. And that's how it ends up in court. It could be that they sue you because they say you did something improper, like these Arkansas cops that are bashing the guy's head on the thing. That's deadly force, you know, and it wasn't justified in that case. So, you know, they're going to have to defend themselves. What they write in their report is very important. Not because they can get away with lying in their report, but because if they try to lie in their report, you know, it's even worse, right? So there was a guy named Michael Slater. He was a cop in North Carolina, and a couple of years ago, he shot a guy that ran away from him. And he stated at the time that the reason that he shot the guy that ran away from him is because there had been a scuffle, and he believed that the subject had his taser. And in the hands of an untrained individual, especially, a taser can definitely be deadly force. Not necessarily that it's going to kill you, but it will incapacitate you, which allows them to then seize your other weapons to kill you with. And if you tase them in the face or the heart, or you know, something somewhere where your training tells you not to do, but an untrained person doesn't know not to do, then it can be deadly force. So under the right circumstances, that could be meet that threshold of imminent risk, you know, and that's where your report is important, right? If you can articulate that and it's true, then, you know, you can justify something that, you know, many people at first blush think is unjustifiable. You know, I'll give you another example where in this case with the officer in North Carolina, there surfaced a video. And in that video, it showed that not only did the subject not have the guy's taser, the taser ended up at his feet. I'm guessing they struggled over it. Maybe the bad guy tried to take it, but it fell to the ground. And the officer may have believed that the guy had it, but that belief wasn't reasonable because he didn't see anything. It wasn't raised towards him. You know, a taser could be deadly force, but it's not quite as much of a trying to think of how to phrase this, you know, in the best way possible, but it's not as scary to cops as a gun, right? If the guy had a gun and he saw a gun, you know, I don't know, you know, you're more justified in being on edge, believing it's imminent, even if it's not directly pointed at you, if it's like he's going back like this, because somebody can shoot blindly behind them and get lucky and shoot you in the head, right? You know, and we'll watch a video a little bit later on where that's exactly what that guy was going to do, was he was going to shoot the cop, you know, like as he's running away with his back turned. And people initially thought that that was unjustified because he got shot in the back as he's running away. But you can clearly see in the video, you know, like He picks up the gun, he looks up, and you can just see the gears turning in his mind, like, can I do it? Can I do it? And the cop realizes that he's picking up a gun, and the cop, draws his own gun. The bad guy sees the cop drawing his weapon, turns like this, then comes back like that. Like his arm is coming up and he's looking back. And if the cop wasn't ready, I think he'd have got shot. So that's what I'm saying. So much of this stuff is nuanced, where it really depends on very specific details. Was the gun pointed at you? Was it traveling towards you? Was there what they call a furtive movement, which, I'm unarmed right now, okay? I'll declare that right now. But if I go like this, what do you think is happening, right? You think you're gonna get shot. And so there's been times when bad guys have done things like that, and then, he's unarmed. But that movement isn't associated with anything else. Even if they produce a cell phone, if they do it this way, it makes you think you're gonna get shot, right? So none of that happened in the South Carolina or North Carolina. I think it was Charleston, North Charleston. And what happened is this guy's running away. In the video, you see his hands, and he's running away, and the cop just like freaked out and decided that he was justified in shooting, because, whatever. Then the cop realizes, you see in the video, the cop realizes, oh, there it is, right? Picks it up and goes and puts it next to the body. That right there got him convicted. I guarantee it. Not that he wouldn't have necessarily been in trouble, not that he wouldn't have necessarily been charged, but the minute he took actions that appear to that he's covering up a crime, he lost all credibility. So his claims that he reasonably believed that the guy had the taser, or that he might have seen something that he thought was a taser, or that there may have been a furtive movement that he thought was the taser coming up and getting shot at him, all that goes out the window. But like I said, these things are nuanced, and I'll give last example, I promise, and then I'll move on. Is anybody familiar with the Atlanta police shooting from a few years ago? The guy, basically, he was passed out in the drive-through line at Wendy's, and so they called the cops, right? And so the cops show up, and this guy is just clearly intoxicated, and they have like a 30 to 40 minute encounter with him that is cordial, polite, he's cooperative, everything is fine till they try to put handcuffs on. And the minute they touch him, put handcuffs on him, he's immediately fighting. He manages to get one of their tasers, fire it at them. It turns out, fired at them. They had fired it at him once, and then he fired it again. And the officers initially, the prosecutor decided to charge them with, I don't think it was homicide. I think it was like manslaughter, like involuntary or something like that. And it turns out, I think the reason that they decided to do that was because tasers only have 2 shots. In the heat of the moment, did the officers really know that 2 shots had been fired? I don't think so. I mean, that's asking a lot. It's like back in the old days when cops carried revolvers, the old Dirty Harry movie or whatever, did I fire 5 shots or 6 shots or only 5, you feel lucky, right? It's like in the heat of battle, when cops have had to use force, there's always a debriefing and you talk about it, and they always ask, like, how many shots did you fire? And most of the time cops get it wrong. They think they fired fewer shots than they did. So that's what I'm saying. It was BS. It ended up that the charges were dismissed, and I think the officers sued and got their job back. But at the very least, they weren't, put on trial or convicted. But it just goes to show you how nuanced this is, that the same person can look at the same encounter and come to different conclusions about whether it's reasonable or not. And it really comes down to the strength of your report, what you were feeling and what you observed at the time, and issues like that. Like in the report, the officer, put potentially very truthfully state that he did not know how many times that the taser had been fired. You know, and anyway, so all of that is why this is important. The other thing too is that it's going to be months or even years down the road before this happens. The Derek Chauvin trial or whatever, the guy that killed George Floyd, his trial was like a year later, you know? And so, you know, I mean, in his case, he was fired, so he never worked again. But, you know, if you're still working as a police officer while your cases are going to trial, how many more different DWIs have you worked since then? How many more, you know, people have you arrested since then? And so your memory starts to fade. It can actually adapt over time. Sometimes you can convince yourself that, you know, you can actually alter memories without even meaning to, you know, just because of subsequent experience and stuff and memory issues. So writing it down as soon as possible after the encounter is a way of locking you into a story and also, you know, helping you to remember it. So when you're going to trial, when you prepare for trial, you always pull out your case, you know, narrative and review it. Troopers like to take pictures of the people that they book for DWI and stuff because over the years, some defense attorneys have made a big show sometimes about trying to trip up somebody like that they don't know, you know, whose trial they're going to, like they don't recognize them or whatever, like, you know, it just kind of makes you look bad on the stand. So the better you can be prepared, the better, or the more you can be prepared, the better. And also when you're on the stand, you can have your notes printed in front of you. There's nothing that says you have to do it all from memory. It's a record that is part of the court record, right? You know, your police report is part of the court record, and therefore you can have access to it. And you can refer to it. If they ask you a question, you know, especially a very specific question, like, you know, what time was so-and-so arrested? Just a second. You know, 3:25 p.m. or whatever, you know, you can do that. It's fine. You're not gonna, it doesn't make you look bad. What makes you look bad is if you guess and you guess wrong, or if it looks like you're trying to cover up something. Because every defense attorney's dream is to discredit you on the stand. You know, they know that it's a rare opportunity that they get to do that, but when they can, they relish it. And some of the high-powered, high-priced attorneys, they live with it. You know, it's a long time ago, there was an episode of South Park where they were making fun of Johnny Cochran, the O.J. Simpson attorney or whatever, and it was like the Chewbacca defense, you know, this is Chewbacca. That does not make sense, and that was the whole thing. You know, it was just it just kind of made these ridiculous claims that got the jury thinking, no, it doesn't make sense, does it? You know, and that's sometimes how it is, smoke and mirrors and stuff like that. So you need to be, you know, very prepared. You need to be, you know, make sure that your reports are as detailed as they can be, because it is possible for you, for example, to say, like, if you state in your report the subject was drunk, what does that mean? What does drunk mean? You know, that's the first thing they said in the other class too. Over the legal limit. Yes, that is one definition of drunk. Anybody think of another? Yeah, but just any measurable amount of alcohol in the system. Okay, but what about like falling down, like slurring words? Yeah, but like there are degrees of drunkenness is kind of the point that I'm getting at. And when I say that I believe they're intoxicated, do I mean that they're over the legal limit? Do I mean that they're falling down drunk? Do I mean that they're tipsy? Do I mean, you know, that they've had some alcohol, but not enough to be over the legal limit? You know, and that's why you don't want to put you don't want to put unjustified opinions in your report. So when you say that somebody's intoxicated, that is an opinion You could also call it by something else called professional judgment. You're allowed to have professional judgment, right? We do it all the time. That looks suspicious, right? That's a professional judgment. But if you only state in your report that you observed a suspicious person and you didn't explain in your report what facts led to that conclusion, you're just stating an unsupported claim, and it's going to be, at some point, there is going to be a sassy defense attorney that's going to force you to explain it a year later. What was suspicious about this? How drunk were they? What made you think they were intoxicated? And maybe you can remember it, especially now because you're going to have video you can review, before the trial. But you can't watch the video at trial. You can refer to the notes, but you can't watch the video on the stand. Let me see that again.
Could you like when going back and writing a report, could you watch your body cam footage just to make sure you get your facts right for that? Because sometimes stuff happens boom.
Now, here's the thing. There are two schools of thought on that. There are some people that are concerned that if officers are allowed to do that, that they're going to watch the video to see what's on the video and what they can lie about, and then they'll know. Whereas if they have to write it blind, they're less likely to lie about things because of the, I don't know what's on the video. So there's that. That being said, body cameras have been a thing in law enforcement for actually quite some time. When I first came on with Pettis County in 2008, the sheriff acquired some, not enough for everybody, but he acquired a few and let some of us test pilot it or whatever. But it wasn't like it was just like a GoPro basically type thing. I mean, it wasn't a GoPro, but that was before GoPro, I think, was a thing. But it was a little camera that could mount on your thing, and it would just, you could record it. It was like a thumb drive, basically, storage, and you could plug it into the computer and then download the videos wherever you want. There was no real security in it, right? So if I didn't like what I saw, I could delete it, right? Kind of thing, There's all kinds of issues surrounding that. Like now, the reason it's freaking expensive is because we have to have these elaborate programs that prevent that kind of thing, prevent you from being able to tamper with it, prevent you from being able to delete it, automatically download it to the server or whatever. The only thing you can do as the officer, technically, is neglect to turn it on, either by accident or on purpose. And they're working on ways to try to make it more sophisticated, like your car cameras. Like if I turned on, when I had a patrol car, when I turned on the overhead lights and the siren, the camera came on. Like there was no avoiding it. If I hit the brakes hard enough to lock the anti-lock brakes, the camera came on. And it had like a 5-minute, like it's always recording, but it records over itself every 5 minutes. And then if you hit the record button, it goes back a few minutes. That's why if you look at body camera footage that gets released on the internet and ends up on YouTube, a lot of times the first minute or the first 30 seconds or the first 2 minutes or whatever has no audio, because it's only that going back, and then when the audio kicks on, that's when the officer either activated the thing manually or turned on his lights or did something that caused an automatic. So it's possible in the future that cameras will get sophisticated enough that they'll basically know when to turn themselves on and that kind of stuff. It's not outside the realm of possibility. Some of the stuff that can be done, like self-driving cars and stuff like that. I mean, that always seemed like science fiction until Elon Musk did it, and now it's a thing, it's not perfected, but it's it's possible, and so in the future, it may be very possible that kind of thing can happen. And I just realized that I came around where the audio wasn't picking up. So that's why I came back here. I'm still working on that. But yeah, body cameras are as a supplement. I definitely.
So like with the body cam, is it like On the Mac, like, as soon as it's on, it goes like straight to your cloud, or is it like you have to download?
Now, most of them are cloud-based. Well, not exactly cloud-based. They still download to a server, I think, most of the time that is within your department or whatever, but they will do it wirelessly. I'll kind of go over that. The first incarnation of cameras that we had in 2008, I didn't have one, you know, but some of the officers were able to test pilot it, and it was totally like required a lot of input from the officer. The officer had to manually turn it on, you know, manually turn it off, plug it in, wait for it to download. And this was like in 2008, 2009, where the internet speeds weren't quite what they are today. Smartphones had just become a thing, you know, that some rich people had. And, you know, like like the supervisors and stuff at the department had BlackBerries, you know, if you know what that is. Like they had, it actually had a hard, like tangible, physical miniature keyboard on it. Yeah. And that's what you would type on. And it, you know, and most people were carrying phones that when you texted, you had to use the number keys and hit 1 3 times and 2 4 times or whatever, you know. So it's a different world back then, but it did take, so primarily those officers that did have it, they didn't use it on every call. They only turned it on maybe when they thought it was super important, like maybe if they were doing a DWI stop, so they could record that, you know, from a different perspective, that kind of thing. It also kind of sucked because you can't really see what it's recording. You know, it's not like your phone where you can see what's happening. And so you do kind of have to, depending on where you mount it on your uniform, you do kind of have to think about, you know, where you're standing and whether it can see. And, you know, to some extent it's trial and error because, you know, if you don't get their feet, you know, when they're doing the walk and turn, then there's no video evidence then of what they did. So fast forward to, you know, 8 years later or whatever, I start with Polk County, and we became the first agency in Polk County to adopt body cameras department-wide. And it was a similar thing. It was a mounted to the uniform thing, and it also, but it had the software program and everything to prevent me from messing with it. You know, I couldn't delete videos or anything like that, but I still had to plug it in at the end of every day so it would download. It would download automatically when it plugged in, you know, but, you know, I either had to sit there and wait for it, you know, or, you know, come back the next day. Like it took a while. And then the other thing too, is that at that time we had to make recordings. So we had to actually burn DVDs of the disc to put into evidence for every case that we had video evidence on, so that when they requested discovery and things like that, that it could be done, you know, it could be pulled from the evidence with all the other evidence. Subsequent to that, like my wife now, you know, I left full-time law enforcement in 2018, and that's still what we were doing. Since that time, both Cole County, where I used to work, and Sedalia PD, where my wife works, have, you know, it's all goes to the cloud, and you don't have to mess with it. And when the prosecutor wants a copy of it, they have access to it too via the internet, you know. So it's getting better, but like with any new thing, right, at first we're, you know, kind of stuck in the rules of evidence and how you get things introduced and that kind of thing, who has access to it, who can manipulate it, that kind of stuff. But it is crazy expensive, because not only do you have the equipment that breaks, you know, and has a shelf life, but you also have the storage of the video. How long do you keep video? You know, you have to have policies about when officers are required to turn it on. You have to have allowances for like technology failures, right? Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes the data gets corrupted. Sometimes it's, you know, not your fault. You know, we work in all weather, we work in all conditions, we get into fights and do things like that. Like there's been versions of body cameras that have been tried to be mounted to glasses, or, you know, something so they see more what your head sees, 'cause that's the other issue. If it's mounted to your chest, it sees what your chest sees, not what your head sees. And in the intro class, you know, I've been for several years, I've been playing that video in the intro class for where that shows the perspectives, different perspectives, how it can appear bad from one angle and totally justified from another angle in the same incident. And that's true, you know, that's the downside to it. If you put it on glasses, I mean, I've been wearing glasses since 2017, and every single use of force I've gotten into, they have either been knocked completely off or barely hanging by a thread from the side of my ear, you know, on one side, because, you know, it's just not secure, you know, on there. And so this is the best place to mount it for not getting knocked off, but sometimes they still get knocked off. In the scuffle with the guy from Atlanta, I wish I could remember his name. I don't know, but that camera got knocked off in the fight. So we don't actually have an actual recording of like a video recording of the shooting itself. We have a recording of the scuffle that led to it. I think there's images where the guy has it in his hand, you know, so he can prove that he didn't take it, kind of thing. But then it's just audio from a certain point on, because, you know, the body camera got knocked off. So it's not a substitute. You definitely can review your video, at least at every department I'm aware of. But there's also the people that say that you shouldn't, and maybe some departments that would also say. But I liked it whenever because I worked in an era where we didn't have it, and then when we did, and it was nice because you could actually, you know, if you're going to try to, you know, okay, what did he say? I can't remember. You could easily go and play back that part of your video where you interviewed so-and-so and get them exactly what they said, you know, instead of paraphrasing it as best you can, you know, and maybe getting it wrong. So, your report is also important because people can change their stories, right? So every time I have ever used any degree of force on somebody, and when I say used any degree of force, I mean anything beyond just like putting handcuffs on somebody. You kind of torque their arm a little bit in that, but it's not really using force. But like if I have to take them down or I have to push them against the wall, I have to do any kind of a struggle with them. I have the same response every time when we get the cuffs on and things calm down and I'm trying to de-escalate and I'm trying to, you know, get them to the car or something. I always say, have you been injured? And do you need medical assistance? Those two phrases exactly like that. Have you been injured? Do you need medical assistance? Why do I do that? Why is it a good idea? Yeah. Because that way they can't later try to make the claim that I didn't try to tend to their medical needs or their injury, right? Because at the time, they may not be injured at all, or they may be injured and not know it because their adrenaline's going, they're on drugs, whatever, and they may not actually recognize that they are injured, right? And so they could potentially later on try to make the claim that they were clearly injured and I ignored their medical treatment, or that they even made requests and were denied medical treatment, you know? And so it's one of those things where you do, you know, every cop kind of treats this kind of thing a little bit different. That's something that I was told during my academy training by a seasoned officer, and I thought it was good advice, and I have adopted it ever since. That being said, I'm not aware, I don't personally know any officers where somebody made false claims like that, but I like to do it because defense attorneys like to make you look bad, uncaring, you know, whatever. And so it's possible, right, that you take somebody down, you put them into cuffs, you stick them in the car, you take them to jail, you know, and then sometime later that night or the next day, they realize my legs, you know, and now, you know, obviously, you know, you might still have some splaining to do as far as, you know, if their leg is broken, you're responsible for it. But at least you can say, when you say, hey, I didn't know, right? You can point to that in your report and say, I asked them if they were injured. I asked them if they needed medical assistance. So some defense attorney can't try to paint you as an uncaring bastard, you know, because you didn't even care about injuring them. You know, it's like neither one of us knew. And you can make that kind of passionate argument. Can you prove it? There's video, you can. If there's not, you can't. But it's still, I make it a habit all the time of doing that, and so I'm confident that I've done it. You know, but you certainly wouldn't say it if it's not true. You know, did I talk about the Marshall PD cops that got in trouble? No. Okay, that's the other class. All right. So an example of this is you definitely don't want to say anything that's not true, or try to hide something, you know, because maybe the defense won't know, you know, maybe they won't bring it up, or maybe the jury will believe me instead of the defendant, you know, that I was, you know, like the cop that tried to plant the taser, right? That was his intent, was to make it look like the guy actually had it, because that would strengthen his fear argument that he was in imminent risk of death or serious bodily harm. So there was an incident in Marshall several years ago. I think I was still in Jefferson City when this happened, so it would have been prior to 2018, maybe early 2018, late 2017, that kind of time frame. But there was a wanted person. I don't remember what he was wanted for. It's probably like a parole violation or something like that. But he had a warrant for his arrest, legitimate warrant for his arrest. Cops had been trying to locate him for a period of time, and they were unsuccessful. I can't remember now if they had some kind of a tip or if they just happened to see him or what. But he was located at Walmart here in town, and there was two officers that came in and converged on him when he returned to his car after shopping at Walmart, and they got to him before he even got, you know, was able to move the car or anything. So it wasn't technically a traffic stop, but they swooped in and they went in to make the arrest, right? As they're okay to do, nothing wrong with it up to this point. There is some kind of a violent encounter in which one shot is fired by one of the officers at the vehicle as it's driving away. The reason this got a lot of notoriety at the time was because following this, Marshall Police Department put out like a press release that said that they were engaged in a full-scale manhunt for this individual because he tried to kill one of the officers, but his gun malfunctioned. The claim that was publicized and believed by everybody in the area was that during the attempt to make the arrest, the officers like entered the car, like one from one side and one from the other, I think, and it's, you know, they were struggling with this guy, and he produced a firearm, placed it like pretty much like right in front of the guy's forehead, and pulled the trigger and got a click, no moving. And then so the officers, I guess, you know, disengaged, try to, you know, to produce their own firearms or whatever, and he was able to drive away, and one of them fired a shot as they went, and nobody hit him. We found out later, but he drove away, and they immediately set up this like dragnet trying to find him. You know, like troopers on the interstate were looking for that car and everything else. It was widely publicized. Every cop in the state of Missouri got a MIAC alert on it and everything else. And it turns out that the guy fled to, like, can't remember if it was Arkansas or Alabama. I know it started with an A and it was, you know, Southern. But I don't remember which one. I want to say Arkansas. And he was found in another state and arrested within 3 days, I'm going to say, because everybody was won this guy because he tried to kill a cop. And so not a lot was said about that after that. He got charged with like attempted murder of a police officer and either that or first degree assault. I can't remember which one they filed. Unlawful use of a weapon. I mean, he caught a bunch of charges as a result of this, in addition to the felony fleeing statute and all that. So fast forward about a year, maybe a little less, maybe a little more. And, you know, it's getting about time for that case to go to trial, and the prosecutor is preparing for trial. And so he decides to review the security footage from Walmart that shows this incident. And the fact that the prosecutor's office didn't get around to doing this until right before trial kind of shows you how busy and overwhelmed they are. There's a lot of cases they have to juggle. So I don't necessarily fault the prosecutor's office for not catching it sooner. But when the prosecutor reviewed the video, he immediately noticed a problem, and that is that the statements that the officers made in the report not substantiated by the video. According to, I never saw the video, so I can't say this. I'm going by it because the prosecutor was pissed off enough that he did a press release and went to war with the police department over this, and said in his press release that he would never file charges if these officers submitted ever again, so they might as well fire him. So he sees this problem that these officers clearly lied in the report, because the video shows they never were inside the car at all. Which means the video didn't prove that there wasn't a gun. The video doesn't prove that there wasn't an attempt to fire the gun that was unsuccessful. For all we know, it's possible, although less likely, that everything they said happened except they weren't in the car. But that's all it takes to kill your credibility, because it looks bad, you know? And apparently when the prosecutor initially reached out to the police department to try to handle this with a chain of command, they were not very helpful in that regard. And so that's why the prosecutor went scorched earth and ended up not getting reelected. Although it wasn't his fault. I mean, I'd have been pissed off too. So basically what the prosecutor did when he realized this before he did the press release is that he reached out to the defendant and offered them a very attractive plea bargain where he dropped all of the serious charges, and the guy pled to like misdemeanor, resisting arrest or something like that. Cause he did fight cops, right? And flee, you know, but you know, they dropped all of those charges, and then he did this press release. The guy sued the police department and won judgment. I don't remember how much, but you know, against the department and thank some of the individuals, you know, in the chain of command. And it was a lesson, really, you know, that no matter how tempting it may be, you cannot distort the facts, you know, to, even if your only intention is to avoid being criticized for something, you know, like the reason, right, that they lied about having a gun pointed at them and click no boom is because that easily justified what they did, firing one shot at a fleeing car. Without that, it's an unjustified shooting, right? That could have killed him or killed somebody or ricocheted and, you know, it's a freaking Walmart parking lot. It could have hit a kid or something like that. You know, what's I think really happened is that this cop just kind of freaked out when he was, you know, when he was not able to fight this guy. And when the guy took off in the car, that's kind of a dangerous, volatile time, you know? And so he kind of instinctively drew his firearm and fired, and then probably immediately realized he shouldn't have done that. Probably why it was only one shot. And instead of him owning it, maybe getting fired or maybe getting, you know, suspended or something like that, he went another way. So it always compounds your problems, right? Michael Slager, the cop from North Carolina that shot Walter Scott, he's in prison primarily because of him trying to cover up his crime and not if he hadn't have done that, he might have had a much less serious consequence for that. You know, maybe not, I don't know, but at the very least, he wouldn't have ruined his credibility. So likewise, in this situation with the Marshall PD, they had to like fire those guys. And, you know, it was a black eye for the department. It was, you know, they lost a judgment. So it cost the taxpayers of Marshall money too. And it was just a big mess, big giant mess, you know, and apparently, according to the prosecutor anyway, the chain of command was not very cooperative because they were afraid it was going to jeopardize the criminal case, you know, and open them up to the lawsuit, which it did. But hello, you know, you got bigger obligations than that. You know, it's a position of public trust, and you know, trust has to be continually earned. Every time something like that happens, it's fuel for the fire of people that hate cops and hate, you know, authority and things like that, because sometimes people abuse that authority. So that being said, basic rules for a report. You do write in first person. If you've written a research paper for me, I've gotten on to you about using first person. Now in reports, you should use first person, because everything in your report is something that you did, something that you witnessed, something that somebody else told you, or somebody else did in your presence. So in other words, if I am engaged in a use of force encounter with somebody and I have an officer to assist me, and I take him to the ground and I see that officer employ a knee strike, I can state in my report that I witnessed that, right? What I can't do is write his report for him, or things or things that I didn't see that I assume he did, or that, you know, if I can say what he told me that he did, but I can't act like I witnessed something that I didn't witness. Does that make sense? And so everybody that's involved in any meaningful way in a case has to write their own report. Now, that being said, in a serious case, you might get a bunch of cops that respond, and only a handful of them do anything that actually needs to write a report, right? You know, because maybe all that they did was set up a perimeter, or you know, something like that, or they, you know, got there after it was kind of under control, so they didn't really do anything but stand there and be like, "Do you need me anymore?" You know, that kind of thing. Something very peripheral that didn't really matter. So you want to articulate, you know, this from your point of view, and that means you use I did this, I did that, and whatever. Chronological order means the best way to tell a story, and this is what you're doing, is telling a story, you know, is you start at the beginning and work your way forward. There are some caveats with that, and meaning that, for example, a lot of times things evolve and play out where you don't necessarily know the identity of the person you're dealing with until a little bit later. Don't wait to say who they are until midway through your report, because that's when you found out, right? You can say something like, I made contact with the subject later identified as such and such, right? That's perfectly fine to do. Because if you introduce them as an unknown subject and then you end up having multiple dealings like that where you don't find out their identity until later, it gets really confusing to read in the report. So you want to, as soon as you introduce somebody, if you know their identity at the time you write the report, you say it up front the first time you talk about them, and every time subsequent to that. You know, you can say a person later identified as, you know, and it suits the purpose just fine, you know, and it doesn't look bad that you say, you know, this certain description went out of the unknown individual or whatever, you know, after that, because you've said that they were later identified. So you do want to identify anybody that's a victim, suspect, witness, all of those people as thoroughly as possible, which means that you are going to need their name, date of birth, you know, social security number, driver's license number, whatever. Usually you just ask them for ID and you get what you need off of that. But if they don't have ID, then there's kind of additional fees. And there is kind of a lesson in that too, about sometimes people claim to be people that they're not because they have warrants. The irony of that is very often the people they claim to be because they have warrants also have warrants, and then it blows up in their face. But nevertheless, if you're dealing with somebody that doesn't have ID, it's a good idea. Nowadays, we have access to the DOR photos on our MDTs, and you can look it up and verify, yep, that looks like them, you know, and just to make sure. Usually the people they claim to be are actually like either close friends or family, like their brother or something like that. And once in a while, perfect storm of a situation comes along where they actually get away with it for a little bit, you know, and then it gets even more messy because you can actually charge them with identity. You know, if they sign anything with that name, it's identity, not just giving a false name. So anyway, you want to talk about actions, you want to talk about what happened, things, you know, so you want to be active in that. You don't want to say, you know, like, oh, trying to think, a search was performed or whatever. It's like, no, so-and-so did perform a search, or these 3 individuals performed a search. You need to be specific about who did what, when they did it, that kind of stuff. Those details become very important sometimes in trial, and especially when you're dealing with a significant event, you know, like, you know, who did what and when needs to be in there, and that needs to be kind of your habit in your reports. Even for something as simple as, you know, you respond to a location to tow a vehicle or something like that, get accustomed to putting the right information in there all the time, because I guarantee you, if you think of it as optional, you might forget to do it when it matters. And then you look like a dumbass on this, you know. So spelling and punctuation, it's another thing that you know, can make you look like an idiot, you know, in court, you know. So try to work on that. You know, it's the 21st century. If I don't know how to spell something, I can start to Google the word and it'll show me the definition, you know, in 10 seconds, or the correct spelling or whatever. So do that. Pronouns like he, she, they, or whatever, it's appropriate to use sometimes, but not like you would in normal creative writing, because you're dealing with complex situations and multiple parties, right? So you never want anybody to get confused about who is he, who are they, who is she. And I'm not getting into the, you know, the whether they identify this way or another with that argument. What I'm saying is, for example, if I say, you know, Bob, you know, went to the store, and then another sentence saying that he got some milk or something, that's pretty simple. You know that he is Bob. But if you've got multiple people in that first sentence, Bob and George went to the store and he got some milk, which one? Who? He? Who's he? You know, and it can get kind of confusing that way. So if it's within the same sentence in a report, like you can say Bob went to the store and he got some milk, but you know, if you're going to stretch it out into multiple sentences, and I realize that this doesn't read as pretty when you do this, but I always start the sentence with, you know, like their name. Either you do have some choices here, and it depends on your situation. Like if you've got you know, some cops like to use first names only. Some cops like to use last names only. Some people like to do the Mr. Miss so-and-so thing, the formal kind of name thing. Some people put the full name all the time. Whatever system that you do, you may have to adapt it once in a while. If you're using first names and you got 2 people that have the same first name, that ain't going to work. Same way with last names. If you always say Mr. Smith, Mrs. Jones, and you're dealing with a domestic and everybody in their damn report is named Jones, you know, you may need to adapt. But watch the pronoun thing, just because make sure that it's very clear. If you use he or she, it's very clear who he or she is. And if there's any way to confuse that, don't do it. Just say their name. You know, and it gets repetitive in the report. Trust me, I know. You know, every sentence pretty much starts with, you know, Jim said this, that, or the other. Jim told me this. Jim told me that. The other thing is, it's important to be clear about what you're saying, right? So if I say that, you know, that the door was closed, right? Am I saying that I witnessed that, or are you telling that? And if it's you telling me that, then I need to say, Sarah told me that the door was closed, so sometimes you have to sometimes those sentences get kind of complicated because you're going to say, George said that Tim told him that this was how it went down, so you're kind of doing like a he said, she said thing. And if that's their statement, it can be relevant in your report, even though in court that would get challenged as hearsay. In your report, you're just saying what they said. You're not saying it's true or false, right? You're saying this is what some people lie to us all the time. If I say that you said that he assaulted you first, right? That's not me, making that claim. That's you saying it. That's why it's important that I preface and say, you're the one that told me that. So some of these little nuanced things, is what trips people up in reports, is because you have to think about what it is you're trying to say and how it might get confused, or twisted around. So we talked a little bit about saying, like, if you say somebody's drunk, right? Using the descriptive words that lead you to that conclusion is important. So instead of saying that somebody's intoxicated, I need to talk about what led me to form that. If I really want to, I can still say, I believe the subject was intoxicated because, but in reality, it's generally not necessary for you to even do that. Because if you say that I made contact with, Jim Smith, after stopping him for whatever, and I smelled an odor of intoxicants on his person. I noticed his eyes were bloodshot and glassy. When I asked him to step out of the car, he stumbled and nearly fell to the ground. Upon stumbling and nearly falling to the ground, the subject declared, "I'm drunk, sorry." So and so, all of those things. You hear that description and what goes into your mind. Oh yeah, he's drunk, but you get a sense for the degree of drunkenness with that statement, and it also supports it. So it's not just me saying it, right? Because it is possible. One of the big landmark cases on police use of force is a case where a person having a diabetic episode was mistaken as a drunk. It can happen, right? Where somebody forms that conclusion and it's not the way it is. So in that report, if the officer's clear about the things that he saw, right, and then it is thought to be true that yes, this person, bless you, was stumbling, or yes, this person, there is kind of an odor, that can be on the breath of somebody that's having a sugar episode. It's not exactly the same as alcohol, but it could be mistaken, I guess, by somebody who doesn't know the difference. Those kind of things, it helps to kind of show, because the result of that particular case, the Graham v. Connor case, was that, an officer has to make reasonable judgments based upon what's known to him at the time, and there was no way for that officer to actually know that that subject wasn't drunk at the time, and he had to take some time to figure that out. And when he had time to figure it out, like, he didn't arrest him and charge him with DWI, but he delayed him while he was having a medical emergency, and it was a bad thing. He didn't believe the subject when he said what he said, but sometimes people lie to us a lot of times. So that being said, it's a good place to kind of break with this. We'll wrap it up on Tuesday, and we'll probably figure out our first report writing assignment at that time. So have a good weekend.